Hello and welcome back. This is Chapter 5, Video 3, in which we'll be discussing categorical forms in the language P. Now, a quick review of what we've seen so far. We have been introduced to the four basic translation forms. So given the interpretation on the right there, we can translate the following. We can translate these very simply as all x fx, some x fx, either not some x fx or all x not fx, and finally some x not fx or not all x fx. Of course, there are alternate translations for the top two as well, but those involve two negations and are more complicated than we need them to be. Now, a couple quick points here about how the symbols work with the interpretation. Notice that there's no predicate letter in here for cats. Why is that? Well, that's because the universe of discourse specifies that we're talking about all the cats at some particular kennel. So we don't need to take account of the predicate for cats when doing the symbolization. It's already built into the universe of discourse. But what if we change our universe of discourse? Suppose we do the following, for instance. Suppose we cross out cats and make it dogs. So now the universe of discourse is all the dogs at the kennel, and nothing that we have over on the left-hand side works unless we also change cats there to dogs. So exactly what the symbols mean depends on the universe of discourse. Since we've changed our interpretation, now we must be talking about dogs. When we say everything is female, it now must mean dogs. Similarly, if we were to change the meaning of the predicate, say the F predicate no longer means female, we'll take it to mean furry, then what our symbols mean must change as well. Similarly, if we took a simple statement like this, which we might translate now as Spike is striped, if we change, say, the interpretation of this particular constant and let it designate spot instead of spike, then the meaning of this changes to spot is striped. So the first point here is that the symbols themselves don't mean anything in the absence of a particular interpretation, and if we make changes to the interpretation, it changes the meaning of the symbols. If we do want a sort of interpretationless understanding of the symbols, it would have to be something like this. Just understanding how the quantifiers work. All objects in the universe of discourse are F for the top one. At least one object in the universe of discourse is F. It is not the case that there exists an object in the universe of discourse that is F, or more simply, nothing in the universe of discourse is F, and finally, something in the universe of discourse is not F. So as we change the membership of the universe of discourse, as we change the set of objects that we're talking about, and as we change the meanings or interpretations of the predicate letters, we fill in with more specificity what these four forms mean. If we do focus on this particular interpretation, then we can symbolize this statement as before, as all x fx. But what if we want to talk about not just the cats in the kennel, but the cats and the dogs in the kennel? We need a broader universe of discourse, and perhaps we'll want to add some predicate letters and constants. So let's take a new interpretation. So here's a slightly different interpretation. We've changed the universe of discourse, so it's not just all the cats at the kennel, but it's all the cats and dogs at the kennel. Moreover, we've added a couple of predicates. C for is a cat, D for is a dog, P P for is spotted, O for is orange, and we've added a constant for Lily and a new predicate for 1 licks 2. Just to give us a little more material to work with. But the important point initially here is that now that we've got cats and dogs included in the universe of discourse, this translation does not work for all the cats are female. So the question is, how are we going to generate all the cats are female when the universe of discourse has both cats and dogs? We need a way to separate out the category of cats from the universe of discourse and then say of that category that they are female. Just simplifying that a little bit for the sake of brevity. One thing you might try, which is going to turn out to be a mistake, is the following. For all x, cx, and fx. This actually is a mistake. It doesn't quite say what we want, but it's in the right direction. The problem is that this says everything in the universe of discourse, which of course includes the dogs, is a cat and female. And that doesn't say what we want. The simple sentence in blue is just all of the cats are female. Doesn't tell us anything about the dogs. Doesn't include the dogs at all. And the funny thing is we end up saying that the dogs are cats. In addition, female cats. So something's gone wrong there. What do we need to do? Well, what we need is the simple, most basic categorical form. We're going to say of everything in the universe of discourse, x, for all x, if it's a cat, then it's female. And that will get us what we want. That statement says nothing about the dogs at all. That'll get us what we want. Technically what it says is, for every object in the universe of discourse, x, if x is a cat, then x is female. So we use the conditional form in the parentheses there to single out the category of cats specified in the antecedent of that conditional, and then attribute to every member of that category, all the cats, that they're all female. To see that this gets us exactly what we want, think about the ways in which this would be true or false. Suppose it is not the case that all the cats are female. Suppose that Spike is a male cat. Then we could find an object in the universe of discourse, in particular Spike, that would make the antecedent true here, him being a cat, but would make the consequent here false, him being male and not female, which makes that conditional false. So there would be at least one object for which this statement is false, which means that the universal claim has to be false. So if there's at least one male cat, or at worst non-female cat, our translation would be false, which is what would be the case for the English too, so that is correct. Let's imagine for a minute that in fact it is true that all the cats are female. Then no matter which object we pick, one of two things will happen. If we pick an object out of the universe of discourse, which is a cat, making the antecedent true, since we've stipulated they are in fact all females, we get a true consequent, making that true. So none of the cats are going to make the universal claim false. What about the dogs? Well, if we pick a dog, say Oreo, out of the universe of discourse, he is going to make the antecedent false. He's not a cat, he's a dog. And then it doesn't really matter here whether he's male or female, because in either case you get a true conditional. So none of the dogs will make the universal claim false either. They'll all make it true. So by conditionalizing on the predicate C for cats, anything in the universe of discourse which is not a cat automatically makes this true. So even if there are male dogs, that won't have an effect on the truth value of all cats are female, and that's how it should be. Let's tidy things up a bit here and move on to some other forms. Let's take another basic categorical form. Some cats are female. Now again, we can't just do this because that would include the dogs, and we don't want to include the dogs in our translation for some cats are female. So again, we need to sort of focus in on the cats. If we follow the pattern of the translation above, we will also make an error. If we combine the existential with the conditional, we're going to get a problem here. What the symbolic sentence says is there's at least one thing such that the following conditional is true. And as we were seeing a little earlier, if we take a non-cat as the object we're looking at, we will get a false antecedent, which gives us a true conditional, which will make the existential vacuously true. So as long as there is some non-cat in the universe of discourse, this existential is automatically true, which is not what we want in order to translate the English there. In fact, we will almost never have the existential combined with a conditional in its scope, because it's too easy for it to be vacuously true. As long as there is some object in the universe of discourse which makes the antecedent here false, it automatically makes the conditional true, which makes the existential true. So what do we need to do here? Well, actually here it's very simple. It's like what we tried at first with the one above. All we need to say is the following. There's at least one thing in the universe of discourse, which is what? Well, it's a cat and it's female. That gets us exactly what we want. So the first two basic categorical forms are as follows. When we want to say something like this, all cats are female, we've got a universal quantifier and then a conditional. When we want to say some cats are female, we've got the existential quantifier with a conjunction. There are two more basic forms that we want to look at. We have all and some. Like in our simple square earlier, we also want to be able to do no or none, and some are not. And as before, there are going to be two different ways of locating the negation for the translations here. One way to do no cats are female is to say, for every x, if it's a cat, then it is not female. So all the cats are non-female. None of them are female. Perhaps more intuitive way is to take this statement here, move it up there, and negate it so that we get the following. It's not the case that there exists an X which is both a cat and female. There are no cats that are female. Down below, some cats are not female. We can very simply do this. There's at least one X which is in fact a cat and is not female. Some cats are not female. But we can also do a universal form of this. It's not the case that all cats are female. Now again, you may well notice that this form appears right here with the negation attached, and this form appears right here with the negation attached. So what that means is, as with the simple square we saw previously, the diagonally opposite corners are contradictory. The first point here, then, is that we do have alternate translations on the left-hand side. To say all cats are female, what we could do is take this translation form and negate it, which would give us, it's not the case that there exists an X which is both a cat and not female. No cats are non-female, therefore all cats are female. And from the top right-hand side, we could take this form, move it down here, and negate it to get, it's not the case that all cats are non-female. So there's at least one which is female. Let me clean this up a little bit and make a few more points before we look at the general forms. So I've erased some of the alternate translations so that we can focus in on some points here. First off, remember that what's happening is, since we've now got a larger universe of discourse, in order to speak just about cats, in the universal form, we need to conditionalize on cats and say, of everything in the universe of discourse, if it's a cat, then it's female. And you can see that at work over here too. When we want to say no cats are female with the universal quantifier, we say of everything in the universe of discourse, if it's a cat, then it's not female. When, however, we're using the existential form, as down here with some cats are female, we use the existential quantifier and a conjunction. There's at least one thing such that it is both a cat and female. Or over here, there's at least one thing X such that it is both a cat and non-female. The examples we were just looking at form the corners of this modern categorical square of opposition. If you look at the upper left, we have the all FRGs form, most simply symbolized with the universal and a conditional. Below that we have the some FRG, again most simply symbolized by an existential with conjunction. And at the top we had the no FRGs, or none of the F's are G's. I'm not sure which of these two you would consider more simple. I prefer this one since it explicitly says it's not the case that there exists something that's both F and G, but this form is perfectly equivalent and for some more intuitive as well. And down below that we have the some F's are not G. Again, I like the existential form here with the negation interior, but it is perfectly equivalent to take all F's are G's and negate that to get some F is not G, or some F's are not G. Now, as we noted, the diagonally opposite corners are contradictory, and this is similar to the simple square of opposition which we've seen before. Different from the simple square of opposition, we do not actually have the downward implications or the horizontal relationships. And I'll talk about the reason for that in a later video. The important thing to remember for now is that the diagonally opposite corners are contradictory. One other thing to know about the pattern here, across the top we have what we might call the universal claims, all FRG or no FRG. At the bottom we have the particular claims, some F are G, some F are not G. On the left-hand side we have affirmative claims, some F are G, all F are G. Whereas on the right side we have the negative claims, no F are G and some F are not G. So you can see then that in the upper left corner we have a universal affirmative claim, whereas in the lower left corner we have a particular affirmative claim. And just so for the other corners. Upper right, it's universal negative, and the lower right is particular negative. And you can see how this is all coordinated by the use of the universal without a negation, the universal with a negation, the existential without a negation, or the existential with a negation. Now, you don't need to remember every detail of the modern categorical square, but the better your understanding of these four forms and how to translate them, the better you'll be able to do on the more advanced translations we are about to embark upon. All of them in the next batch will be translatable in terms of these categorical forms or slight variations on them. In many cases, the variations will simply be slight changes to either the F part or the G part or both. And I will try to make that as clear as possible, how to determine which of the 4 forms to use, and then how to modify the subparts to get the correct translation.